Donkey Kong Country. What's there not to love about Donkey Kong Country? They're some of the best, if not the best, platforming experiences of their era. Now, I love the Donkey Kong Country series, and I have since I was a kid, both the classics and the modern ones. But when Donkey Kong and his country returned in 2010, he brought something along with him that was never in the older games. Hidden, challenging K levels, which are only unlocked after collecting every Kong letter in that respective world, which tests your skills and mastery of the game's physics and mechanics, and pushes you to your absolute Donkey Kong Country playing limits. K levels were then brought back for Tropical Freeze in 2014 as well, and they were even better than ever. I've always had a fascination with K levels. Just these secret, secluded temples hidden away behind completion milestones, housing some of the hardest, most difficult, and stressful platforming challenges of the whole game that the Kongs must traverse in order to reach Banana Enlightenment, or something like that. Okay, it's really to unlock the secret world of each game. Speaking of which, these secret worlds also house their own difficult challenge levels, and although not classed as K levels by the game, they're definitely equally as hard, if not harder than the K levels, and are definitely intended to be challenge levels, which test your mastery of the game. But yes, these levels have always intrigued me. So naturally I wondered one day, which of the K levels were the easiest, and which were the absolute hardest? Which K levels pose challenges so excruciating you wouldn't even wish them on your worst of foes? So I figured I'd rank them. All K levels, both Returns and Tropical Freeze, easiest to hardest. Ranked from the perspective that the person playing them is quite familiar with the modern DKC games, but who are only playing the K levels for the first time. Rankings might swap and shift around slightly if we take into account any pre-existing experience. Let's go! Starting out our list, sitting alone in D tier, is 3K Shifty Smashers from Donkey Kong Country Return. Given how I've just described the K levels in the intro, perhaps you expect that even the easiest of the bunch is still at least a little challenging, but no, Shifty Smashers is laughably easy. The only thing this level tests from you is your fucking patience. No, literally, for 90% of the level, you just have to sit and wait and be patient until these big golden blocks move out of your way before you can continue pushing forward. The only reason you would ever die on this level is from impatience. Perhaps you thought you could make the next cycle only to be squashed into a pancake upon trying, or you just wanted to roll jump through without a second thought. But the thing is, as long as you're patient, you can always just stay back and wait for an opening. There's no time limit in this game, and there's always multiple save spots nearby where you can just sit forever and will never be squished. There are only 2 sections in this level which pose even a remote challenge. This part where a spiked ceiling slowly lowers down, forcing you to duck not to get hit. Combined with that enemy nearby, if you crouch too close to him, you might take a hit, but you won't die. And this other part where at the very end of the level, a wall chases from behind you, forcing you to go quickly, whilst the ceiling and floor close in on you with these thin platforms as your only safety net above a floor of spikes. If you let it close in too far, you'll start hitting your head on the ceiling too. However, if you know how to roll jump, this part poses little to no threat either. So yeah, Shifty Smashers, not challenging. D tier. I didn't even die once when going back and playing it for this list. Next, moving up to C tier from Tropical Freeze, we have 1K Swinger Flinger. Swinger Flinger is certainly a step up from Shifty Smashers. I mean, look, there's actually active threats everywhere. Pits, spikes, enemies. This level can actually put up a fight against you. This level is mostly made up by straightforward vine jumps off of these rolling platforms, and bounces off of enemies. Basically, just basic platform. This is actually a huge trend with the K levels. A lot of them just task the player with completing basic platforming. Granted, it is more difficult platforming than you would find elsewhere in the game, but being a platformer, platforming is the skill you have by far the most practice with in the whole game. So even if the platforming challenges are above average in difficulty, it doesn't mean much. Another thing to note about this level is that it actually gives you a Kong barrel. Very few K levels actually do that, and by giving you this barrel, it turns the relatively difficult platforming into a breeze. Tight jumps between spiked triangles become effortless with the ability to just hover through into your Dixie or bounce off with Cranky. This section tripped me up a bit when going back to play the level, probably more than it should have. I mean, in reality, it's relatively straightforward. You just have to be patient and wait for the openings when climbing these vines, but for some reason I had trouble with that. If you're smart, unlike me, this part isn't tough. There's also this part where you're climbing vertically up 4 vines with spiky objects that fall down from above you. It looks a little threatening at first, but it's pretty effortless. If you're scared, you can just take your time and wait for larger gaps to jump through, but you'll find that even the smaller, scary looking gaps are still easy. There's a small chase sequence at the end where you jump from vine to vine off of enemies, whilst a large boulder follows behind you from above, crumbling and breaking the logs holding up the vines. If you slow down and hesitate here, you will die, but since there's nothing you need to wait for and you can just keep holding forward for the most part, that's unlikely to happen. If you just keep moving forward, you'll get through and then you're done. I actually died a surprising 5 deaths on this level. I blame the switching from Returns physics to Tropical Freeze physics. They're mostly the same but have minor differences in weight and floatiness and roll bouncing mechanics. Next up in C tier, we have 1K Platform Panic from Returns. At first, it was very tough for me to decide whether Swinger Flinger or Platform Panic was more difficult. Ultimately, I decided that Platform Panic was more difficult because I felt like it would provide an unfamiliar player with more difficult platforming challenges, given how the platforms A, come up out of nowhere, making it difficult to know where you're going to have to jump to next right away, and B, collapse if you stand on them for too long, forcing you to have to go relatively quickly. These two things in combination could certainly be the result of at least a couple deaths for somebody trying the level for the first time, as they don't already know what jumps are coming up next. Also, the lack of a DK barrel, tight low jumps off of enemies in between spikes, and jumps around whatever these things are called, places it comfortably above Swinger Flinger. But much like Swinger Flinger, Platform Panic is mostly comprised of just basic platforming, which, as I've already made clear, isn't the most difficult challenge the game can throw at you. I only died twice on this one. Third up in C tier, we got 2K from Returns, Tumbling Temple. Tumbling Temple at its core is actually quite similar to Platform Panic. Like Platform Panic, the platforms begin to collapse, or in this case sink, once you step on them, and you also have to wait for the next platforms to appear before you can progress. The difference is, however, that Tumbling Temple replaces the spikes and jumps through small gaps with a barrage of bats positioned in the most annoying of locations. Seriously, these things are not easy to avoid every time. The level also heavily punishes impatience, because if you get the urge to jump early, which a beginner tends to do, you'll find yourself getting your cranium absolutely crushed as the next platform that you were supposed to land on comes careening down from above you, absolutely spiking your donkey butt into the lava below. There's multiple sections where you race against sinking platforms struggling to climb up whilst being pelted with bats. I mean, to me, despite it providing you with a DK barrel, I find that the challenges on display here are a little more nuanced than those of Platform Panic, being a little more than just kinda hardish platforming, comfortably placing Tumbling Temple above it. I did only die once though. Capping off C tier, we find Tropical Freeze's 3K, Precarious Pendulums. Like Platform Panic, I would lump Precarious Pendulums in the basic platforming category of K level. However, despite that, the more difficult parts of this level are the ones that don't involve it. This section here, where you have to evade multiple swinging electric pendulums, gave me a bit of trouble, although I figured it out eventually by paying closer attention to burn marks on the wall in the background, which telegraph where the pendulums swing. There's also some cannon sections, which I wouldn't call difficult, but you certainly have to focus while doing them, because if you don't, you'll likely react late and shoot at the completely wrong time. Not to mention right near the end, where they trip you up with these two pendulums that suddenly only swing halfway and don't complete a full semicircle, which is a little tricky the first time. And the jump off of that second one onto the next platform, I always found that a little janky as well. Although, I do find this level oddly forgiving at times. Like, look here where I clearly was going to fall and die, but because I got hit, I was able to just barely hang in the air long enough for the platform to come in and catch me. Or right here, where I definitely didn't shoot out of the cannon in quite the right time, but I still got absorbed into the next cannon anyway. Also here, at the tail end of the level, where I was almost able to save myself by landing on the side of the swinging platform whilst it retracted. The combination of this level's forgivingness, the fact that it gives you a Kong barrel, and the fact that it's mostly comprised of just simple platforming, makes this one not too difficult, but still places it comfortably above everything that comes before. I died 4 times. Kicking off B tier, we have 8K, the 5-monkey trial from Donkey Kong Country Returns. Now, being the K level for World 8, the final non-secret world of Donkey Kong Country Returns, you'd expect something that's super elaborate and challenging. But no, the 5-monkey trial is quite straightforward actually. Granted, that doesn't mean it's easy by any stretch of the word, but it's also not super difficult either. This level consists of 5 trials, hence the name, ranging from effortless to challenging. I'll go through them in order. First, we have this room where you have to gather all the banana coins to progress to the next, whilst bouncing on these 3 springboards and evading these little spiky balls. It's like middle difficulty. If you try to rush it, you might get hit, but you also might not. But if you take your time and take things slowly and really wait for the best opening to grab the coins, you'll easily come out unscathed. It's also convenient that this is the first challenge that the level provides you with, because even though of the 5 it's one of the more difficult ones, it's a lot easier to practice it with repeated attempts and get the hang of it because it's the first one the level throws at you and the one that's first to greet you after every death. Second, we have this section where these falling rock pillar guys pop up from the background and force you to move to a safe platform to not get crushed by them. This one's pretty effortless. You just have to move to the safe spot until it's over. I mean, I guess you need to be kind of quick, but even then, not really. The third room is just about as easy as the second. It's very straightforward. You just have to bounce off of 4 squids shooting from each side to get to the top. That's it. You might get hit once here, although it's highly unlikely. The fourth room I remember being a lot more difficult when I first played it. Basically, you're on this rotating wheel that spins to the left while there's multiple blocks of geometry above you traveling to the right. This forms these small gaps that you have to go through. However, the catch is that there's also these little purple guys coming from the right side traveling to the left. This means that you have to form a delicate balance between jumping over the purple guys when they come, whilst making sure that the coast is clear when going through the gaps to ensure that the purple guys won't hit you whilst you're running through them. I find that although this part is tricky for players who've never encountered it before, once you know it, It's pretty easy. My strategy is always to just jump over the enemies first before I go through the next tunnel coming up. Sometimes I slide down the side of the wheel and die if I go too far to the right, but most of the time this never happens. Finally, the 5th room presents you with a barrage of boulders flying at you from the background while you jump between 2 fairly wide platforms with a small gap in the middle. The boulders fly at you in a certain sequence with 5 different patterns that they can be in. Patterns 1, 2, and 4 are easy. Pattern 3 is mid difficulty, but the dreaded pattern 5. What you're supposed to do is jump in between both platforms right over top of the bottomless pit and make sure you stay in the air long enough for the boulders to break on the ground before you can land safely back on the platform. And then they make you do it again, all the while making sure your jump is executed perfectly not to get hit on the way up or fall down the pit on the way back down. I don't ever remember having this much trouble with this part in the past, but having gone back to the game to play all these levels for this video, this part really tripped me up. There is one saving grace, however, and that is that if you enter the last room with 2 hearts, which isn't the most difficult thing to do, you can just let yourself get hit by the first boulder barrage of pattern 5 and then damage boost to the second. Overall, the 5 monkey trial has some challenges ranging from easy to mildly difficult to borderline hard. But despite it being the K level of the final main world, a big part of the reason it lands itself so low on my list is its length. It's a super short level. Regardless of how challenging it is or isn't, it's very easy to give it multiple attempts in quick succession, and regardless of how many tries it takes you, it's inevitable that you will eventually beat it. It doesn't barrage you with multiple difficult spots throughout a long, grueling level like most K levels do. It just has one hard part at the end, except the end isn't even that far away or hard to get to in the first place, and you can cheese it as long as you can stay at max health, which again isn't that hard. I did, however, die a staggering 8 times on this one. Sitting snugly in B tier, we have 7K Treacherous Track from Returns. Treacherous Track has an interesting gimmick. You ride atop a moving platform for the whole level while racing to hit switches which activate the track in front of you, allowing you to continue forward without falling. There isn't really any standout difficult part in this level besides perhaps the ending section. However, I think it still deserves its placement because I find it's quite easy to die from falling or take unnecessary hits. I mean, being basically an auto-scrolling level, it's easy to get impatient and reckless, causing you to get hit by one of the many enemies or beds of spikes strewn throughout this level, and sometimes it can be a little difficult to keep up with the platform as well. One missed jump in certain parts of the level can spell certain death, as the extra time it takes to try again will ensure that you're unable to catch up with the platform or reach the next switch in time. Also, throughout the whole level, walls are constantly appearing out from the background, and for a player who's never played the level before, this can certainly result in a couple deaths. You know, with enemies suddenly appearing before them or walls suddenly blocking their way after they tried to roll jump to get ahead of the platform, causing them to fall to their death. But the aforementioned ending section. I find that in this part it's always a little bit ambiguous what I'm supposed to do, at what times I'm supposed to stay put and be riding the platform, and at what times I'm supposed to leave the platform to go hit the next switch. Normally in this level, after each switch you hit, you're looking to get back to the platform to wait for the next one. But I think in this section it wants you to go from switch to switch to switch with infrequent stops on the actual platform itself. I always end up taking at least one hit in this part. You really have to know how to pace yourself on this level, because too slow and you fall behind and die, and too fast and you're recklessly getting hit or blocked by enemies, spikes, and obstacles. I died only once. Next, we meet with 2K Bopopolis from Tropical Freeze. This is a fun one. The main gimmick of this level is enemy bouncing, which in and of itself isn't super difficult, but it's inherently more tricky than, you know, the classic basic platforming, just because there's a little bit more timing and precision involved, especially considering how you have to have a good understanding of your momentum when jumping off of enemies, otherwise you either won't make the gap to the next one or you'll go too far and fall in between them. Some of the jumps can be a little strict too. If you push forward a little too much during this owl staircase section, you could easily end up taking a hit from one of the flaming owls. Or this flying penguin section here, where if you don't do it fast enough, you'll have taken too long and won't be able to make the gap to the next enemy and will fall and die. Or during this part with the penguin and the walrus, if you take just a little bit too long, you won't be able to reach the walrus. Also, there's multiple sections with rotating arrays of enemies to bounce off of. The first one you encounter is relatively straightforward because it sets you up high above it and you're able to roll jump quickly past most of it. But the second time it throws these at you, which is right near the end mind you, it can be a little tricky. If you don't push forward enough and get stuck bouncing on the enemies to the left of the wheel, you won't have the height or speed to reach the next ones and you will die. This combined with having to jump to another wheel that's coming from the top of the screen can be quite the challenge, especially for somebody who hasn't seen the level before. Also, another thing to note is that if you have multiple repeated attempts on this level, your fingers start to hurt. Holding the button down to get high bounces off of enemies so often can start to get a little painful. I don't know if that contributes to difficulty or not, but it's worth noting. I died 3 times on this one. Finishing off B tier with a bang, we have 4K Blast blast and bounce from returns. This level revolves around two things: tight cannon blasting and tricky tire bouncing. The first section sees you blasting from cannon to cannon whilst avoiding spiky guys which orbit each cannon. If you're impatient, it's easy to get hit or die here, because in returns, when you get hit while firing from a cannon, you lose your momentum and start to fall, unlike in Tropical Freeze. You actually have to put some effort into timing your shots, because if you get impatient and try to rush through, you will die. And that is a recurring theme with the entire level. Next, you find the bounce portion of the level, where you bounce on a couple small tires and off of a couple enemies. This part isn't difficult, but you might get snagged and take a hit on one of the spiky guys here. Next, you get to the second and last bounce portion of the level, in which you bounce on these large tires which move up and down in a wave formation over top of and in between the aforementioned spiky guys. This part is notoriously tricky for a lot of players, but if you pay careful attention to the movement of the wave and time your jumps in accordance, you will have no trouble. Next, you reunite with the blast portion of the level, where you're shooting up, only to fall back down and reach a cannon that's positioned below you whilst trying to evade getting hit by the spiky guys again. This part might get you once or twice, but once you figure out when you're supposed to shoot in relation to where the spiky guy is for each one, it's quite easy. Then you reach the penultimate section, which sees you shoot from various cannons which slide up and down, and your goal is to fire when you're directly in line with the next one you have to reach, while again avoiding, you guessed it, the spiky guys. Oh, I love those spiky guys! Woo! I find this part to be the trickiest section. Even if you're just a little off, if you end up getting hit, you'll lose your momentum, fall, miss the cannon, and die. So even if you would have reached the cannon if the enemy wasn't there, because it is, you die anyway. Finally, they start to take it easy on you in the last section. It might look scary and confusing, but in reality, it's quite straightforward. You just have to wait for the cannons to line up with each other before firing, and the window is quite large unlike the prior section. And before you know it, you're done. Overall, it's not too bad, but I think it marks a point where these levels start to get definitively difficult. I died 4 times. Coming in at the bottom of A tier, we break the mold a little bit with 7-3 Crazy Clouds from Tropical Freeze. Now, immediately I know you're questioning why this is even on the list if it's not a K level. Well, you're right, the game doesn't classify the secret seclusion levels as K levels. They certainly are made in the same vein as them. That's why 7-1 Levitation Station, 7-2 Rocket Rails, 7-3 Crazy Clouds from Tropical Freeze, and even 9-1 the Golden Temple from Returns will all appear on this list. They're all levels that feature no checkpoints and that are meant to be difficult and push you to your Donkey Kong Country playing limits. They belong here. Anyway, this level consists of mostly platforming on these like plane platforms, which will explode after a short time once you stand on them. It also features a lot of enemy bouncing as well as weaving through gaps and spiked blocks. Now, the interesting thing about this level is that many of the objects in this level are ones that, as a player, we've never encountered before. This can certainly cost you a couple lives for your first time. You don't know that the clouds disappear, or you don't know that your momentum is preserved on the rocket platforms at the end. There's a few tight, tricky spots as mentioned before, the jumping through the spiked blocks, and this part near the beginning where just about everyone seems to get snagged and take a hit. But besides that, this level is mostly just, stop me if you've heard this one before, basic platforming. It also provides you with a lot of hearts to heal any of the damage you may have taken in previous sections, so that doesn't help its case either. Don't get me wrong, it's still generally difficult, and it's certainly earned its place in A tier, but yeah, I only died twice on this one. Spinning its way into A tier, we see Tropical Freeze's 4K Spinning Spines. In this level, you mainly traverse up and down off of these platforms which stick out of rotating brick cylinders in the background while spikes coat the walls on either side of you. This is one of the few times in these games where I actually found a perspective-based challenge kind of difficult. I'll admit, it's a little hard to tell sometimes when I can and can't land on these platforms. Like other K levels, this level also heavily punishes impatience. If you try to rush through things here, you're going to find yourself plunging into more pits than you can count. After a little introduction section, there's a cannon section which is quite straightforward, but again, if you get impatient and try to rush through it, you will take a hit here. Next, you reach the section in which you climb a column of rotating platforms in between 2 walls of spikes as described earlier, except with every set of 2 platforms, the rotation switches, all the while you're getting chased by bees. This can be quite difficult at first, but it becomes easier with practice. However, if you struggled with that, this was just the first half of the level. Next, you find yourself in a section flooded with lava with various platforms that sink once you step on them, much like Donkey Kong Country Returns 2K. However, they sink much faster here and it makes it so you have to keep moving forward. However, you can't move forward too quickly because you have to pace yourself properly to evade these skewers which stick in and out, and the timing to evade them is a little unorthodox and tricky. Finally, you come to one final climbing section. It's like the one mentioned earlier, except lava is rising from beneath you, forcing you to never stop progressing upward, or else it could catch up with you and kill you, and the platforms alternate the direction they spin after after only one platform rather than two, they spin faster, and there's also this cannon part where if you panic and shoot too early, you could miss the platform and fall and die. After that, there's a short cannon section, which is quite straightforward, but I remember I died the first time when going back and playing this one because I was rushing and mistimed my shot. Overall, this one is definitely difficult, but the only thing holding it back from a higher position is its length. It's really short. If there was just one more major section where it took the previous challenges in the level up even more notches, I could easily see this level sitting comfortably amongst the greats in S tier. I died 5 times. Next, we have Crazy Cloud's partner in crime, 7-2 Rocket Rails from Tropical Freeze. I would say that the basis of this level is that it tests almost every major skill that you can learn in this game. From platforming to enemy bouncing, minecarts, cannons, and rocket barrels, this level has it all. The most difficult section is definitely at the beginning, where you're jumping from these thin vertical platforms that either move quickly back and forth or up and down. There's also platforms that drop if you stand on them for too long, and spikes to come down and hit you. Now, much like the 5-monkey trial, because they placed the rather difficult part at the very beginning of the level, it doesn't add much to the overall difficulty. You get a ton of practice on this part after each attempt because you're greeted with it every time, and it becomes quite easy to develop a route to quickly move through it with roll jumping. Besides that, the challenges this level presents are moderately difficult. The minecart section is quite straightforward. I've never really had much trouble with minecarts in these games, and this is no exception. Next, you come to the cannon section, where you alternate between shooting out of cannons and jumping off of the same platforms that drop if you stand on them for too long from earlier, all the while avoiding falling stone blocks. I remember this part being beyond tricky for me the first time, and although now I'll agree that the timing to avoid the blocks is not the timing that you would expect, and is definitely one of the more difficult timing challenges in the game, it's not so bad. I mean, just look at this crazy jump I somehow did. I somehow did not die there. Next, you come to the rocket barrel section. This part is mostly straightforward as well. However, there are 2 spots I can imagine somebody taking a hit. First is the part with the circling fire owls. I could see somebody who hasn't experienced the level before easily taking a hit there. And next is the part where you have to maintain the same height in between a short tunnel with spikes on the floor and ceiling. Although I find that it's easier to maintain the same height on a rocket barrel in Tropical Freeze than it is in Returns, but even so, I can imagine someone getting hit here. Finally, you come to a section full of long jumps off of various small rocks and enemies, and this annoying part with the grass ceiling that you're supposed to grab onto above you. I've died countless times here, pressing the jump button as if I was going to bounce off of the next upcoming enemy, only to find that I've already latched onto the grass at the top, and by pressing jump, I've just flung myself off of the grass and into the depths below. But yeah, this part is quite easy. Basic platforming spiel again. The jumps are kind of far, yeah, but by this point, you're a master of roll jumping, and it's no challenge for you. I think the main thing that places this above Spinning Spines is its length. Spinning Spines is a shorter than average K level, while this is a longer than average one. So even if most of the challenges it presents you are generally easier, you simply have more chances to fail just by it being longer. Therefore, it just edges out Spinning Spines ever so slightly. I died 3 times. Topping off A tier, also from Tropical Freeze,
is 6K Slippy Spikes. This level is the ultimate patience tester. If you try to rush, you'll be stuck on this level for so long. And after every little section, you have to stop and make sure you're ready to enter the next opening before you go. If you try to skip forward and jump there from an earlier part, you will get hit. This level consists of many various sections of geometry coated in ice, which move up and down periodically in between a floor and a ceiling of spikes. You have to be very careful not to bounce too high up and hit the ceiling, but also not fall off the slippery platforms to hit the floor. Now, in a vacuum, none of the jumps this level asks you to complete are difficult, but the ice physics actually significantly increase their challenge. There are even points where, because the way the platforms swing and move, even if you're standing completely still and your hands aren't even on the controller, you can still fall off. So you always have to be on your toes in this level. It requires patience and wants you to move slowly, but you also have to be quick on your feet and not let your guard down. That is an excruciating combo. The level is also quite long if I can remember correctly, which makes the whole patient component even worse and really tempts you to go quickly. I don't think any section is super noteworthy on its own. Just know that on average, most sections in this level are more difficult than the average sections of K levels that you can find in B tier and below. The only saving grace of this level is that it gives you a Kong barrel at the beginning. Without it, this would be hell. I only died once surprisingly, and it's only because I was able to keep patient.
Finally, we reach S tier. I've been swapping around placements in S tier like crazy. Seriously, I cannot decide which level is the hardest. I've even had to resort to looking at other people's playthroughs on YouTube to see which ones they struggle with more and less, and even then I can't come up with anything. So you know what? I'm just going to go over them all in chronological order, and then I'll show you what I've come up with ranking-wise afterwards. First up from Returns, we have 4K Jagged Jewels. Jagged Jewels mainly consists of many platforms which periodically have spikes pop out of them, multiple spiked crushers, and these floating platforms which move up and down, each with their own ring of spikes orbiting them. Later in the level, you also encounter very fast skewers, as well as these long cylindrical platforms with the same spiked rings that will move back and forth as the platform turns and changes orientation. I would say that the key to beating a lot of K levels is patience. It ensures that you play well and you're not rushing and recklessly pushing forward. If you're patient, you're able to avoid taking unnecessary hits. However, despite this level heavily punishing impatience, being patient doesn't make it much better. Regardless of patience, the timing of when you're supposed to jump from one floating platform to the next can be very ambiguous at times, and if you go at the wrong time, you're either taking a hit from the ring of spikes or the enemy on the platform. Some of the turning cylindrical sections can be tricky as well, just given the amount of spikes and enemies placed on them. Okay, here, just look at this part. I'm stuck here without a ditty to my name. I have to jump past the skewer and reach the cylindrical platform ahead. I can't jump when it's high because I just simply won't have the height to make that jump, but if I jump when it's low, I get hit by the enemy. That's what I mean with this level. I was perfectly patient, but the actual timing of some of the challenges on display here are still difficult and precise, even with patience. The only saving grace of this level is that it provides you with a DK barrel at the beginning. Without it, this level would be torture. Diddy Kong grants you the ability to stall in the air, and in a level like this, that is a godsend, because if you end up trying to jump to the next platform at the wrong time, Diddy usually allows you just enough air time to stall so you can avoid getting hit anyway. But if you lose Diddy at any point throughout the level, well, you're as good as toast. But not like as good as toast taste-wise. I mean like you are toast. Like you've been toasted and your skin is burnt to a crisp. That? Why did I write that? So, when considering it for the top spot, I'm thinking about how heavily it punishes impatience, which a person playing the level for the first time tends to be, which will get them killed a lot. But it also remains quite difficult even if you are patient, just with how precise some of the jumps need to be and ambiguous the timings are. It has an average length, so it's not like gruelingly long, but it's not over quickly either. I died 5 times on it when testing these levels for this video. So, as of now, this level's looking like a pretty decent contender for the toughest, but of course, we can't draw that conclusion before we meet its competition. Next contender for the title is 6K Perilous Passage from Returns. Now, from what I understand, this level is notoriously difficult. It has a reputation. Every time people are replaying Returns and playing all the K levels, this is the one that they're afraid of. That's what I gathered from the Let's Plays at least. The entire gimmick of this level is that there's lava rising beneath you, and in a desperate race to keep ahead of it, you have to jump on platforms which fall down from the ceiling. This in and of itself is not difficult. What makes this level a pain is the additional fire enemies which roll down the walls on each side and really take you by surprise. For somebody just playing the level for the first time, they will get hit by these, and a lot at that. Another challenge a first-time player of the level might face is that they don't quite know the best route to follow on the falling platforms. Don't get me wrong, you can jump anywhere, and it's not like the game screws you over and traps you in so you're forced to die. No, as long as you keep jumping to the next platforms, you will be able to continue. However, that's not to say that all of the jumps are made equal. Some require simple platforming, while others require precise roll jumps above the lava, which you could very easily dip too low and die from it, or not make it to the next platform that you're aiming for, bonk off the wall, and die to it as well. Not to mention, but these falling platforms are also a threat to you as well, as if you don't keep moving, they actually fall from the ceiling and can land on you, causing you to take damage. After you pass the first section of the level, you're met with a little intermediate section that's not quite as difficult. You jump past these sliding platforms with spikes, but then you're met with these 2 electrified bugs chasing you. Now, these things are notorious. Almost every Let's Play I went back and watched to get data for these levels, the players are making comments about how annoying they are. I mean, when there's just one of them, they're not the hardest thing in the world, but trying to dodge 2 of them at once, all in this tight corridor, yeah, no, I pretty much always take a hit here. Next, you come to the final section. The lava continues to rise from beneath you. Meanwhile, 2 springboards float up from beneath. You have to jump between the springboards and on a few platforms. All the while, you have the fire guys from earlier coming down the walls and one of those blasted electric bugs chasing you. I remember when first playing this level, this was the part that did me in. Like everything that came before, difficult but manageable. But this was my breaking point. I couldn't figure out how to not get hit by the bug. I didn't know how I was supposed to avoid it. But after only a couple more seconds, it's over. You've beaten it. When considering it for the top spot, I'm thinking about how notoriously difficult it can be for players who've never played it before. players who don't know how to evade the electric bugs indefinitely. But I'm also considering how I think this level gets significantly nerfed with experience. I mean, when I went back and played it, I did it on my first try. I did intentionally kill myself right at the beginning though to get rid of Diddy Kong because this level doesn't give you a barrel, so it would be ingenuine to play it with him, but that doesn't count for obvious reasons. But yeah, I think about how new players complain that the fire guys come out of nowhere, but if you just know to pay attention to the top of the screen, you can see them coming from miles away. This puts me in a tough spot when ranking these, because I think for somebody experienced with the level, it's not a big threat. The challenges it presents to the player from a purely fundamental skill standpoint are not difficult, but it becomes disproportionately more difficult the less experience you have. But hey, this list is ranking these from the perspective that you've never played them before, so Perilous Passage has a decent shot at the title. But now, moving on, we have 9-1 from Returns, the elusive Golden Temple. The Golden Temple is often considered one of the toughest challenges the game can throw at you, but also yet somehow not that bad from the research I've done. It's a very long level for one, and it mainly consists of jumps to and from various floating fruit which either bob slowly up and down, rotate slightly, or move left and right. The platforms are quite far apart at times, and often very small, like these blueberries. If somebody tasked you with completing any of these jumps in a vacuum, and you only had to do it once, you could do it just fine, but having to do them multiple times in a row, one after the other, greatly increases your chance of dying. It's a weird dilemma because these jumps aren't hard per se, but simply the fact that you have so many chances to die means you will die quite a bit regardless, especially if you try to rush and roll jump past everything. Landing on enemies and small platforms with roll momentum can be tricky and you won't always succeed every time. Now, all of that was just the basic structure of the level, so now let's get into some specific noteworthy challenges that it presents you. The cherry bomb section with these cherry platforms that swing back and forth and explode if you stand on them for too long, I found to be extremely difficult. Well, that's if you actually engage with the mechanic, that is. The timing for when the two cherries are close enough for you to actually jump to the next one is so ambiguous and tight. I didn't once actually succeed at doing that jump properly. However, with some simple roll jumping, you can bypass every cherry section with relative ease. But of course, somebody playing the level for the first time might not come up with the idea to do that right away. After the cherry section, you reach a section where giant oranges periodically fall in between small blueberry platforms that you have to jump to. Despite coming after the cherry bomb section, the falling orange section is actually easier. Just be patient and you win. And then finally, you're met with these revolving bananas that come from the background and travel into the foreground. Like I mentioned in Tropical Freeze Spinning Spines, most perspective challenges in these games aren't super difficult, and this one is no exception. Other than that, I guess there's these tiki enemies which shoot at you, which could potentially snag you a couple times, but probably will never result in a death. And there's also multiple sections where you have to toss bombs back at koala enemies to blow them up, and if you're unadjusted to the grabbing and throwing controls in the game, then you might struggle with that a little. Also, unlike all of Return's other K levels, this one is very generous with hearts. If you take a hit here or there, you'll pretty much always have a chance to heal that missing heart back up. I think this level, instead of being a gauntlet of extremely difficult challenges spread across an average length level, it's more like a gauntlet of average difficulty challenges spread across a very long level. I wouldn't call it super difficult, but despite that, you're definitely going to die at least a couple times on this one. When considering where this one will place in S tier, it's a question of the actual difficulty of the challenges presented to the player in the level versus how much the player will die on it. I think generally though, I tend to value death count a little more over like actual difficulty of the challenges, because I think most people tend to let death count define how difficult they perceive a level to be in their head. This is why levels like Rocket Rails placed above Spinning Spines. Spinning Spines presents more difficult challenges to the player, but you're likely to die more on Rocket Rails simply due to its length. I died 11 times on the Golden Temple. Moving on to Tropical Freeze, we have probably my favorite level in all of Donkey Kong Country, 5K Platform Problems. For near the entirety of this video, you've been hearing my qualms with how some of these levels aren't that difficult because they're just basic platforming. But Platform Problems, it's a different breed. The thing about Platform Problems is that it actually manages to make basic platforming difficult. With platforms that flip up and then back down after only a short while, and platforms that glide back and forth on tracks at lightning speeds, the timings for some of these jumps can be quite ambiguous and difficult. Not to mention these segments with low ceilings, which if you bonk your head, you'll likely kill all your momentum and fall to your death. Or these other sections with low ceilings, except there's spikes above your head this time. Finally, it all culminates in a huge section of rising platforms which periodically naturally flip from horizontal to vertical, spikes, enemies to bounce off of, and platforms which fall quickly the second you so much as tap them with your toe. Your pace needs to be absolutely perfect here, otherwise you'll find yourself falling behind the platforms and falling to your death, or alternatively, if you go too fast, you'll find yourself jumping too early and falling to your death anyway. You can hear the fear in Let's Players' words when they finally pass that section for the first time and hope to high heaven that they don't die so they don't have to do that part again. Even after that, there's still a little section of level, which although by this point shouldn't pose a challenge for you, it does have the potential to kill you, leading you to have to replay the whole level and that hard part again. I died a total of 5 times. And finally, we arrive at 7-1 Levitation Station from Tropical Freeze. This level sees the Kongs traverse various cube-shaped platforms lined with spikes which float up from below the screen, only to fall back down after a short time. The level gimmick can be very tricky for an unfamiliar player, as if you hesitate to move forward even a little bit, you will gradually fall behind as this series of platforms in front of you fall lower and lower until you either die from spike damage or just can't make the next jump from being caught too low down. After the short spiky cube section at the beginning, you come to a section where blocks from the background shoot forward and construct the level in front of you. However, like everything in this level, these are on a timer as well. If you don't know that you have to rush through it, you can fall behind and die. But once you know, it's not really all that difficult. It does become a lot less challenging if you know you can just roll jump over everything, but obviously a person trying it for the first time might not realize to do that. After that, you come to both the easiest and most boring section of the level, where it makes you wait through a section with wheels of bananas revolving around 2 square platforms that you just straight up have to sit and wait on with absolutely 0 obstacles threatening you at all. And after that, you return to your regularly scheduled rising and falling platform jumps, which becomes much more difficult if you choose to take the lower route where you climb on the grass rather than just going over top of it all. Then you come to a short cannon section, which albeit has rather strict timing, it's still quite easy. Next, you come to this huge level set piece where you fall down this wide tunnel, and as a result, your gravity is greatly reduced. The reduced gravity makes this part genuinely effortless, but what's annoying about it is that you have to wait through it every single time that you die. This level is a professional time waster. Next, you come to a section with enemy bouncing and spiked cubes which fly up from beneath. If you don't go at the correct pace here, you will end up getting hit. Go a little too fast and you're getting caught by a spike and taking a hit. Go too slow and you're not making it through this section where you're supposed to jump in between 2 spiked cubes at once. After a few more jumps, you're at the final section. Now, from what you've heard of this level so far, it probably doesn't seem all too difficult, but, well, it's all thanks to this final section that this level even gets a taste of the blessings that lie in S tier. I don't know if this makes me biased, but this section, when trying to complete all of the K levels in hard mode, was the absolute bane of my existence. Getting through this little gap with no extra Kong and only 1 hit was hell. And it was only made worse when after every death, all the way at the end of the level, I had to wait through the revolving banana section and the low gravity section every single time. Granted, with an extra Kong, this part does become a lot easier, and thankfully this level does provide you with a Kong barrel at the beginning, but even so, it remains difficult to keep up with the platforms here, and only gets harder once the smaller platforms start to fly up. Can you imagine this section being just as much a pain for somebody playing the level for the first time regularly as it was for me doing it in hard mode? I think that Levitation Station gets hard buffed in difficulty when you're playing it for the first time, which, as I've established, is an extremely large factor in my placement of these levels. So, for me now, this one isn't too tough. In fact, I didn't even die once when trying out all the levels again for this video, but I remember struggling a lot with this one on the first time, more so than other Secret Seclusion levels. It's also on the longer side, so again, even if the challenges it presents you with aren't necessarily the most difficult individually, with a longer level comes more chances to die, and more deaths means a more difficult level. Yeah, I did a stupid voice for no reason, I'm sick of reading. So, now that you've got a rundown of the contenders, here's what I believe to be the top 5 most difficult K levels in all of Donkey Kong Country, with the stipulation that these are the first time you're playing these levels. Here we go. At number 5, we have the Golden Temple. Despite its length, I just can't get over that none of the challenges it presents to you in particular are that difficult. Yes, as I've said, you're prone to dying more on longer levels simply because you have more chances to die, but even after applying that logic, I still think this one places below everything else in S tier in terms of objective difficulty. Although, only barely. Coming in at number 4, we have Jagged Jewels. To me, the jumps in this level on average are more difficult than that of the Golden Temple. Although they may not be spread nearly as far apart, and you may not have to be dodging shots fired from tikis appearing out of black holes, the likelihood that you miss space to jump and end up getting hit by a spike here or there is so high compared to the likelihood of you getting hit or falling on the Golden Temple that I still think it's more difficult. And although it's shorter in length than the Golden Temple, it isn't by very much. I would say that the Golden Temple is a long length K level, but I would say that Jagged Jewels is a medium length K level and not a short one. So the length discrepancy between the two doesn't play nearly as big a role as it does for other levels. Placing third overall, we find Levitation Station. It might not look like much, but actually playing the level, especially if it's your first time, reveals its true difficulty. Maybe you won't take nearly as many hits as you would on Jagged Jewels, but as opposed to taking hits, you'll just be straight up falling to your death. I mean, for one, already the jumps and obstacles featured in this level on average are more difficult than that of the Golden Temple, and like with Jagged Jewels, they may not be as far apart, but it's easier to fall behind and take hits on the spikes than it is to just get hit by the projectiles fired from the tikis. But that's also not accounting for the fact that you also need to move quickly on Levitation Station or else you'll fall behind and die. At least with Jagged Jewels and Golden Temple, you get downtime in between obstacles, but not here. And that makes this level exponentially more difficult when considering a player who's only playing it for the first time. Runner-up, the second most difficult level out of all the K levels is Perilous Passage. Although this level gets hard-nerfed if you have experience, I feel like it's garnered the reputation that it has for a reason. If you already know it, it's not so bad, but if you don't know it, there's so much more you have to deal with. You don't know where the platforms are going to fall, you don't know when the enemies on the walls are going to come down, and you don't realize to look ahead for them, and especially, you don't know how to not get hit by the electric bugs chasing you throughout the final section. That part, I mean, it is truly perilous. And finally, the hardest K level in all of Donkey Kong Country is Platform Problems. To me, the main reason Platform Problems earns this spot over Perilous Passage is that it remains hard despite your experience. In doing research, it seems to me that most players struggle equally with both stages, but because Platform Problems difficulty doesn't hinge so much on it being your first time through, it takes the edge over Perilous Passage. The jumps are tight and difficult, and it caps it all off with one killer of a platforming section. Platform Problems is the rightful holder of the title of the hardest K level in Donkey Kong Country history, in my opinion.